He preached a sermon and they lifted a phrase, "God damn America." And Hannity was claiming that he was not a racist, like so many of us white guys do. I'm not a racist. I've got black friends. Come on.
Welcome back to If I'm Really Honest, where I seek truth without tribalism. It's a place where ignorance isn't punished, curiosity is rewarded, and conflict doesn't have to mean contempt. As always, I hope that I've brought you someone that you don't fully agree with, and if you've brought yourself, you're way ahead of me on that one. Today, I'm joined by Ken Kemp. He's a retired pastor and author, and the host of the podcast, The Beached White Male. He's a vocal anti-Trumper and an advocate for social justice. In this episode, you'll hear our discussion of what happened to him when he couldn't bring himself to say the right thing in his ordination interview. He'll also tell you how the Grand Canyon cracked open his theology and how talk radio drove him from the church. He also talks about what he thinks is the solution to today's toxic polarization. This all actually connects to my upcoming video on how to talk to an atheist, so make sure you're subscribed so you get notified when that's released. And now I give you Ken Kemp. So your podcast is Beached White Male.
That's right. Yeah.
Can you tell me?
Yeah. The title of my podcast now for all these years has been The Beached White Male. And when I first started it was, I had to think about it to say the phrase, but now it's just kind of rolls off the tongue. The title really came from a 2011 Newsweek article, a cover story where this white guy, aging white guy in a Brooks Brothers suit was laying face down on the beach. He's laying there with the waves lapping over him. And the big title on the front page of Newsweek magazine was The Beached White Male. It was in 2011 during the Obama administration. It was an article about how white males are threatened by the fact that they're becoming a minority. Dominion, their power is being threatened. The assumption has always been that if you're an educated white male, you're going to be in control of things. And I read that article right about the time I was going through a funk that came from 3 years in a church ministry that didn't end well. And I was feeling like the beached white male. But you know what it really comes down to is I as an aging boomer, I've come to terms with, the toxic element of white supremacy and white dominance. And it's rooted in many ways, at least in my experience, in a white version of evangelicalism. A lot of good things in the evangelicalism that I was part of for many, many, many years, but there's also a lot of damage that's been done. And I had to lay down on the beach for a while. Felt a little bit like Jonah getting puked up on the beach and rethink some things.
How did whiteness play a role in your ministry experience, or did it?
Well, I think, it's almost embarrassing to admit, but I, like a lot of guys like me, I was in business for 25 years. And during the day, my background noise was Rush Limbaugh. And I was
Sure.
listening to him, and I just kind of thought he was harmless. He was a funny guy, not realizing that I was swimming in his water, and then a big change for me came when Barack Obama ran for president in 2008. I really got caught up in his campaign, and I began to identify with the priorities that he articulated and got kind of caught up in Obama mania. And I saw what conservative radio did to him. It wasn't just Rush, it was Sean Hannity. There's this incident with Jeremiah Wright, which I don't know that you would remember, Jamin.
Yep, I do, but a lot of my listeners won't. Go ahead.
Jeremiah Wright was Obama's pastor, and he was pretty radical guy, Trinity Church on the south side of Chicago. But he preached a sermon, and they lifted a phrase, "God damn America," from his sermon. That's what kind of everybody remembers. And conservative radio just went after him as this anti-American, communist, Marxist preacher who was associated with Barack Obama, and Obama actually had to disassociate himself from him. And it was such a tragic story. I went in and I listened to the sermon.
Hey, wow, that's a novel idea. Going to the source.
I had to find out for myself. Okay. And Sean Hannity took that phrase and he just, he replayed it over and over again, almost like a staccato. Almost every phrase he'd bring in Jeremiah Wright saying, "God damn America." And Hannity was claiming that he was not a racist, like so many of us white guys do. I'm not a racist. I've got black friends. Come on. I began to see that as just a totally racist thing that he did. There was no interest in trying to understand what Jeremiah Wright was saying. And, in his sermon, he basically was saying it was actually a plea to God for justice because of the things that have been done to his people throughout history. And rather than trying to understand, where this came from, it was just an outright racist assault on this African-American guy running for president.
So then now put in the awkward position of appearing to defend guys like Sean Hannity, which I don't want to at all. Also, I feel like that's what politicians, people in the politics business do. And so I feel like it wouldn't have mattered. Like that was Sean Hannity's job.
Well,
yes?
I will say this. It certainly made him a wealthy man.
Right.
And it was exploiting, that racial tension, to build his audience and to give his people permission to embrace his animosity and his inability to really educate his audience to understand.
Right.
In the business, it's all about ratings. And you get ratings, you make money. And he certainly has done that.
So I guess what I'm saying is I think Sean Hannity would have done something equally despicable to Obama's circle, no matter what color they were.
Yeah.
And this guy happens to be black.
Yeah. And for me, Jamin, that's part of the reason we're in the position we're in right now in such a divided country.
Right. Would you mind saying what side you feel like you're on or what your leanings are currently, if that's where you were before, if you were?
Yeah, I mean, people who listen to my podcast are, know. I was raised a Republican. I did not re-register in 2008. I voted for Obama, and then I voted for him again in 2012. I found myself increasingly alienated from the party that I'd been a part of all my life, the Republican Party. So, yeah, I'm a registered Democrat. I've voted Democrat ever since. Then, of course, in 2016, when 81% of my people put Donald Trump in office, that's what pretty much pushed me right over the edge. That pretty much did it for me. But I just, in fact, this morning, I'm finishing my book on the Scopes trial of 1925. Last few weeks, I've been taking a deep dive into that whole story. It's been 100 years now since the Scopes trial, and we're in 2025. In many ways, it feels like we're right back in the courtroom in Dayton, Tennessee, 1925, with Clarence Darrow going after William Jennings Bryan. It's kind of the world we're living in. And it's a binary thinking. It's I'm either this or I'm that. And you are either this or that. And if you're that, then I'm done with you. I'm moving on. Unless you want to have an argument, which I don't think will get us anywhere, because I know you're not going to change your mind, and I'm probably not going to change mine. And here we are.
I agree with you. That's, I think, the most toxic thing we have going on, and it is shocking how prone to that my species seems to be. Like, no matter what the fight is, like, we're just searching for a tribe, and we want a tribe that's going to keep us safe from the evil bad guys. And there are a lot of leaders that are willing to tell us who the bad guys are and why we're the good guys, and we just latch onto that every time, and it's so irritating. What is the way out of that for your listeners, for your friends? Like, how do we break out of this thing that seems to be in our DNA to want to latch on to my team and hate the others?
Well, for me, and you, I think you brought it up since we've been recording. For me, I think we all need to go through a period of deconstruction. And I think deconstruction is a really healthy thing. Now, there are people in the world I come out of who are looking at deconstruction as this big threat, but that's no surprise. And it goes back to just my story, because, I graduated from Bible school, spent 2 years at Big Bad University, UCLA, and then I went to seminary. So I had all this training for ministry. And spent the first probably 8 years of my career in pastoral ministry in Evangelical church. In fact, Evangelical was in the name of our denomination. But evangelicalism has become something very different from the way we perceived it in the 70s. Started changing in the 80s, but I go back to the 70s. I'm really old school.
Yeah. So then, as we discussed when I was on your show, your path and my dad's path, for example, and the path of people from that generation who made up my world before, because it wasn't just my dad. Like, he was in friendly company. What happened there, do you think? Because I see both sides unable to see what happened with the other side. Like, but Jesus, and the other side says, yeah, but Jesus. Like, how could you get to where you are? So how can you get to where you are?
I was part of this movement that really embraced the label evangelical, and evangelical then meant we're not fundamentalists.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Is that Evangelical Free? Is that the group that you were part of? Okay.
My denomination was Evangelical Free Church of America. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
And
familiar with
some
that.
people will know that. This is a small denomination. And I went to the denominational seminary, Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. I got an MDiv in 1974. And we had guys like Carl Henry and Clark Pinnock. And I think, our mission was to embrace the kind of essentials of evangelical theology, but separate ourselves from fundamentalism and the fundamentalist separatists. And Billy Graham kind of was the one that got that going in the late 50s and the early 60s. But the term evangelical was kind of a new one to a lot of people. I mean, I remember when people would ask me what church I went to or where I was a pastor at, and I would tell them, well, I'm at the Evangelical Free Church. They said, the what? And they couldn't even pronounce it because it was a new word to them, which we kind of liked because then we were able to define it and all that. Now, everybody knows about evangelicals, and what has happened in popular culture, at least, is that evangelical means MAGA Republican.
Right. And in my mind, it means fundamentalist.
And
I consider myself a
former
evangelical fundamentalist. So for you to say that evangelical meant not fundamentalist, that's interesting.
Quote, evangelicals, have the true colors have emerged, at least in that segment. But, I think I was in my early 30s and I saw things happening to evangelicalism. Like I remember sitting down with my boss, who's and I won't bring up his name here just because, but I was a college pastor in a mega church here in Southern California. And the senior pastor called me and my friend in and said, this is about 1980, 81. He says, I got this call from a guy named Jerry Falwell. And he's starting this thing he calls it the moral majority. And he wants me to be a part of it. He wants me to join in and be part of this thing. What do you guys think? And both my friend Dan and I just said, no. You do not want to be a part of that. Those guys.
Because you know of Jerry Falwell?
Yeah, Jerry Falwell.
Did you say that because you knew who he was or you didn't like the idea of the movement?
No, we knew who he was.
Okay.
And, I look back on it now and, their whole thing was abortion, but also Republican politics, conservative Republican politics. And, they were all about, well, they won't let us pray in public schools. They're persecuting us. So we need to start our own private schools and we need to do homeschooling and we need to expose public schools for the secular humanism it is, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And even then, this is the early 80s. I just didn't buy any of that. And I looked around at the guys that I was working with, and I just realized, you know what? I can't do this for the rest of my life. So I ended up going into business. And so for most of my career, I had a business. I was a certified financial planner. I became a financial advisor. It was a good run. But what ended up happening, Jamin, and I may have told you a little bit about this, is, when I got to be close to 60, I'd done okay in my business, but we'd been part of a church plant, and I just kind of got all those pastoral vibes going again in my life, and I ended up thinking, this is really what I want to do for the rest of my career. I want to be a pastor. And so I sold my business and took a job in a church as I was actually the executive pastor. And that's when I found out that I really had been disconnected from what was going on in evangelicalism. It took a while for me to figure this out, but it turns out that my denomination had gone the way of the Southern Baptists. If people who are listening to your podcast know about that story.
Go ahead and summarize what you mean by that.
Well, my evangelical tradition came out of a thing called dispensationalism, which gave us, the rapture and and all that stuff.
Which is a new concept, which most people don't know. They think that that's just in the Bible and it's always been with us, but it's the rapture as we know it.
Right.
relatively new invention.
Right. And so, we evangelicals, we're looking for the signs of the times and the late great planet Earth, and all that stuff, which is part of the reason I kind of moved on, because I had a hard time even with that. But I wasn't ready to address it or really think it through. But what ended up happening in my denomination and in the Southern Baptist Church is they basically abandoned dispensationalism and embraced a reformed theology, which is highly patriarchal. And at least in this version of Reformed theology, the whole thing about women in ministry and, and all that, complementarian and everything.
Yeah.
It took me a while to figure out that that's where these guys had gone. And I remember I wanted to go back and get myself ordained, because I wanted the church to kind of affirm what had happened to me, where I was feeling called back into ministry. And I went through this 2-year process where I just wasn't meeting the standards that these guys had set. And they were hesitant about letting me in, but I could never figure out what it was. I know now that I wasn't ringing that bell. It wasn't like doing the, about tulip reform, about reform theology, total depravity, limited atonement. It's all about predestination, all that stuff.
Right. R.C. Sproul type of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Jesus didn't die for the whole world. He only died for the elect. Oh, and by the way, that decision you made at the Billy Graham play, that really doesn't mean anything, because you think you have free will, but you don't have free will. You were chosen by God. And I did do a good job of articulating that theological view when I'm in this ordination process.
Could you feel it when you were in it? Could you feel that you weren't articulating?
Well, I couldn't figure out.
Did you know what they wanted and you just couldn't bring yourself to say it?
I didn't really understand what they wanted.
Yeah, okay.
I understand it way better now.
Right.
Because the 3 years came to an end, and it was clear that, I was in the wrong place, and it ended badly. No scandal or anything, but, just it wasn't working. I found myself going into this really deep funk. And what I thought I'd bring up on your show is I ended up sitting down and saying, okay, I've learned a lot. I ended up reading books. I've read literally hundreds of books now, trying to figure out what happened. And I understand it so much better now than I did then. But I did end up sitting down and deciding that I needed to rewrite what I believe, as opposed to, saying, being in front of an ordination council and having these young guys, quizzing me with questions. I decided to sit down and write down what I really believe. And I ended up, the book is out there right now. We can put a link to it there if you want to. It's called My Creed, an unauthorized rewrite of the generally accepted evangelical doctrinal statement. So I did that. I couldn't help myself.
We love our subtitles.
Yeah, but I ended up writing that, and that gave me a lot more clarity about where I'm at. And it also gave me a confidence to be able to talk about it and not worry about being rejected or ejected. You're in that ordination thing, and it's all about like, well, I got to tell them what I really think, but I don't want to blow them away either. I want to, I want them to go, oh yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, that's where I got stuck. Honestly, like I made it all the way up to getting my final papers, and I just had to put my signature on the paper that said it's a sin to drink and get tattoos, and I just it's not worth it.
Tattoos in there?
Yeah.
Okay, that one wasn't in mine. The drinking thing was in there. Homosexuality,
right.
Divorce and remarriage.
Yep. Right. Yeah. Sure. And I could kind of see the biblical, but I wasn't I wasn't in need of. I had this other career path too on the side, and so this was just something that I felt like I should be doing.
Yeah.
But when it came to that, I was like, I don't think lying in order to get in a position where I can share the truth with people is probably the right thing. So never mind.
Right. Right. So for me, I think I look back, and the literalism was something I just couldn't embrace, and then also the notion that we have this corner of the truth. I began to understand, okay, we have a version of Christianity, but you know what? It's a version of many versions. This idea that we have the truth, and that everybody outside our little silo is missing the truth. And our mission now is to convince everybody to become like us. And if they don't, they're going to suffer some sort of eternal torment consequence. That was something I just could not get my arms around. Basically, it took me a while to figure out that the whole thing's really pretty much made up, and that helped me let it go. Let's go.
Right.
They just made this up to make us, feeling like we've got to be committed, we got to show up, we got to write checks, we got to be there, we got to be part of the community, and if we're not, we're in deep weeds.
Yeah, I don't. Tell me how it went for you in your seminary. For me, we had church history and we had all the other eschatology and soteriology, and we learned all that, but it was all like following this tiny little thread that was like, here's what we believe and here's what the early church believed, and it's just been the same all the way through, and then like trying to follow that little path. And I didn't realize where we ended up is nothing that ever existed. Like you go back 100 years,
it's not even there.
None of these beliefs
right.
exist. You go 100 years before that, none of those, like there's nowhere, there is no thread. There's a lineage of humans, but there's no thread of theology that actually connects what we believed with what the early church believed or what the Bible said. Even though, we really worked to say, yeah, nothing's really changed. We're the same good Christians that have always been, who believed the truth. So when you say we don't have the truth, like that's heresy in, as far as I know, every denomination that's out there, because they all play the same game
exactly
of following their lineage back, and everyone's always just believed this, and all the good people believe like us, and they always have, and all the bad people are everybody else.
Exactly.
Did you have that same experience in
seminary? And that's when I started to understand, the whole concept of binary thinking, that, it's either this or that. And so much of what I was taught in my religious world was, it's us and them, and it's either right or wrong. You're either Orthodox or you're a pagan. And it's that kind of, that was the other thing that's also made up. I have to let go. A human, to be human is way more complex, and there's nuance there, and it requires intentional listening and understanding and exploring and being open and being curious, and those things get, I'm going to say, eliminated. At least they get diminished or pressed down because they're a threat. And that's pretty much what we see. I think that's one of the reasons why I've been so interested in diving into the whole Scopes trial of 1925, because that's really what it was about. That's what it was about.
So then, going back to one of the earlier questions, aside from deconstruction and leaving the religious fundamentalism and binary thinking, what else do you see with your community? How do you break down that binary thinking? How do you open people to new things, or how do you stay open yourself to changing your mind?
Well, the simple question for this guy who's been retired for a while now is my podcast and my reading and my interaction. I mean, we've developed quite a community of people who are working on these questions and who are thinking about this. Now, we all are dealing with the question, what about those family members and those neighbors, who are really just caught up in that whole world? And we represent a threat to them. I mean, we can probably find common ground and maintain our friendship and family. We decide we're just not going to talk about this. We're not going to talk about that. We're just going to be family. Those are kind of coping mechanisms. They're all good, but they don't answer the question of, how do I change the mind of that person who's caught up in the conspiracy and the cult of conspiracy theories, that's all around MAGA world right now, that we all can see. And that's a harder question. What I hope for and even pray for is that people have the kind of experience that you and I've had, where we encounter something that challenges our basic assumptions. For example, I'll never forget, struggling with the question of young earth, creationism, and evolution, like we all do, particularly those of us who've studied the Bible, and
Right.
And we
took it seriously.
I started with the Schofield Reference Bible, and there it is right there on page 1, Genesis 1, 4004 BC. That's when it was.
Yep.
It's right there in the Bible. Now, it's not in the, that story.
Right.
But
yeah.
So
I think they have a date for it too. Like it's October 26th of something 4004.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
And there's a time too. I think it's like about
the month and the day.
5 p.m. Yeah, it's crazy.
At the time. It's all right there. So I had taken a geology course at UCLA, And I have no recollection of the geology professor going, that Bible story is bullshit. You listen to some Christians, you think that's what they all say, when they're in the classroom.
Right.
I'm sorry, I don't know if I can use that word on your podcast.
Yeah, sure.
Is it?
Yeah, you can use whatever
am
you
I
want.
okay?
Yeah.
So I'll never forget standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon for the first time. And in the back of my mind was my geology class where we just talked about sedimentation. How
Yeah.
how a lake forms and sediment forms at the bottom of the lake, and then the lake dries up, and then another lake comes in, and more and more. And I'm looking at those layers, and I'm thinking, where in the world did we get the idea that we can defend the notion that the Earth was created 10,000 years ago? And I mean, I just remember walking away going, what were these guys thinking? What they told me was that God created the earth with apparent age to trick us, just to see if we would really believe, even though the evidence before our very eyes was contrary to what we were told we were supposed to think and believe.
Yeah.
That's what they told us. So that, I'm going, yeah, right. Okay, that's an interesting perception of God. But it's moments like that I pray for. Like, I'm a Democrat. Everybody knows that. So they know I'm anti-Trump. So I'll just be anti-Trump. I see people caught up and just hearing all of these stories that Trump just spews out. In his first term, we actually had a count of his lies and misrepresentation. We actually kept a count. Oh, we're up to 2,842, and we're in the first year of his. And we had the count going all 4 years. Nobody's doing that now. They're not doing that, but they could.
Yeah.
And I see people just going, well, no. He didn't know Epstein. He told Epstein to take a walk. He didn't like Epstein. He thought he was a terrible guy. And and I go, okay, what's it going to take? What is it going to take for people to become aware of what they're caught up in? And to me, it's going to take, like for me, it takes those moments where I go, oh, my assumptions they don't work anymore. I got to rethink it.
That makes total sense. I think there is, as you're standing at the Grand Canyon, you have the option of saying, maybe I'm wrong. If you don't have that option, then you never get that revelation. You stand at the Grand Canyon and you are struck with the awe that everybody is as they stand there and they go, look how amazing God is. And it reaffirms their young earth, evangelical fundamentalism, whatever label you want to put on it. Like, it just makes it that much stronger. So they meet up with Ken, and Ken's like, can you believe that? And they're like, yeah, can you believe that? And you both go your opposite ways because the change requires the possibility that you're open to change, which is why I don't like the idea of coming to a conversation with a whatever, pro-Israeli, pro-Trump, pro whatever you're against, pro-evolution, whatever your mindset is, coming into that conversation with the idea of, what can I do to change this person's mind? How can I fix them? To me, that's the evangelical fundamentalist impulse.
Exactly.
Is here's a person, I know they're broken, and so I gotta treat them with kid gloves, and I gotta, because they're wrong and they don't know it. So how do I fix it? I feel like the only way that we come to those realizations is if we walk up to our Grand Canyons with the option of, maybe I'm wrong about things that I hold really dearly. And so instead of trying to fix the MAGA person, trying to hear the MAGA person, which that sentence in itself is heresy in a lot of circles. Like, that just made me the enemy for a lot of people, because that's not what we do with those evil people. With those evil people, they don't deserve to be listened to. We need to get rid of them. And so having the possibility of being wrong seems like an important precursor to any of this kind of change.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. And I love what you said, because I do believe that sitting down and listening and hearing stories, like where did you come from? A lot of people who are caught up in evangelicalism have a really powerful story of conversion. I mean, I've talked to people all the time throughout my whole career, who grew up in a dysfunctional home. There was a lot of pain. There were addictions. There was abuse. There was all kinds of, I don't belong. Where am I going? And in coming to Christ and finding a community of believers, all of a sudden my life changes and I get a sense of purpose, and now I care and I feel as though I'm worthy. And those moments are powerful. They can't be denied. And I do think that hearing people's faith journey is a powerful way to communicate with people that you might not even agree with. And that's a way to, I think, find common ground and build relationship, which opens the door. The other thought I had as we were talking was how much of what we do in religion kills curiosity. We're going to have a Christian worldview conference. And the whole conference is designed to tell you what you're supposed to think, and then B, tell you how to defend it. And then C, we're going to go to the airport and we're going to tell all these people who don't know what we know, what we've learned, and we're going to see what happens. Do evangelism. And, that whole thing creates this sense of, I'm not a very smart person, but that guy up there who is speaking, wow, he's a really smart guy. So if he believes it, then it must be right. Even though I don't understand it and I got a lot of questions, I'm gonna run with it. The whole thing basically tells me that I am not capable of really embracing or understanding this big picture. I just have to memorize what I've been told, and I'll repeat it out there. And I think that's got merit. And, for me, when I started understanding that that's the dynamic of the apologetics class and the evangelism training class, and all those things, I'm realizing that what gets killed there is curiosity. And what gets killed there is really an interest in what's happening beyond this world that I live in.
I mean, I think to a certain extent, having come from that world myself, to a certain extent, most people in the religion. Now, this doesn't apply to me necessarily because I spent a lot of time studying all this stuff. Maybe not helpful stuff, but I spent a lot of time in it.
Yeah, me too.
For the vast majority of Christians, they don't have that kind of time.
That's true.
They're raising family and working a job. Like, I don't have all the answers, but this guy up here says he does. And oh yeah, the stuff that he's saying actually does make sense as long as there's no one else on the stage with him to rebut any of that stuff. So yeah, that affirms what I want to believe. And so yes, now I know that I'm safe and there are answers and I can keep going and I don't have to look into it. I probably couldn't understand it even if I wanted to, like you're saying, because there's that implied, like, you're not smart enough. If you think that you're smart enough to question these guys who've been doing it, that just proves your pride. So if you want to be a good Christian, you stay where you belong. And then I find that when you do raise questions, pretty much every one of those conversations terminates in some kind of phrase like, well, you just have to have faith. Because in the end, there aren't answers to all the questions. And I feel like that's the curiosity killer right there, is all the verses, and there are a lot of them, that say, you know what, the more you believe in the face of evidence to the contrary of everything about your belief, the more you have that,
right,
the better Christian you are.
Think about that one. Right. Yeah. The more, and I've thought about that often too. And I think that's one of the reasons why this group that we're talking about is so vulnerable to conspiracy theories. Because, if somebody comes and tells us something that just kind of makes sense, and we're really not geared to, well, where did that come from? How do I verify what you've claimed here? What's for real? I mean, we go to that creation question.
Right.
And, we're told that we're supposed to believe that, dinosaurs and humans coexisted.
Mm-hmm.
And the ark, my favorite, this is the monument to biblical literalism, is that ark that Ken Ham built down there. Where is it, in Kentucky or something?
I really want to go see it, actually, because it's not going to last for very long. That thing's going to be shut down because there are fewer and fewer people to support it.
Right. And what the kids are told when they go on their, on their homeschool or their Christian school, trip, they're told that, there are people out here who don't believe this.
Yeah.
If you become one of those, then you are no longer saved. You can't be saved and not believe this. And what that does is when somebody walks away and goes, well, I think you had to get a bunch of cranes in here to
Yeah,
build
right.
this thing. And I
And
don't
there's a
think
steel
Noah
structure
had
behind it.
access to cranes.
Yeah.
Well, but I better not think about that, because if I do, then I'm going to start doubting. And so, the more fantastical the idea is that we're told to believe, if that's a measure of our faith, what have we done to our ability to think and to have the capacity to discern?
Yeah, well, so I guess we just keep praying for those open opportunities. And I think what you're saying too about like hearing other people's stories, I feel like that breaks down barriers, not just in the religious realm, but with all kinds of racism and just othering in general. To put yourself, to read a book, biography from someone who is in that group, and to see the world from their eyes, I feel like that's a great way to break in without having to make it an argument. Just like, here's a story, just enjoy the story and live in someone else's shoes for a second. I think that's going to work in most cases better than some syllogism or something that, proves to you that you're wrong.
And intentionally put ourselves in a place where we're hearing the narrative of the person outside that we were told we shouldn't listen to. And I remember, even in Bible school, I was like this. If they told me not to read a book, one went right up to the top of my reading list. I'm going.
I was a better Christian than you, so I was more obedient, but I definitely kept a log of them to read later.
Right, exactly. They're on the shelf, and you'll get to them. But what does it say about the validity of my faith if I'm so threatened by some outside voice? Like, no, you can't go to university. If you go to university, you're going to lose your faith. And if you lose your faith, you lose your salvation, and you lose your place in the church and your place in the family. So why are we so threatened by the notion of exposing ourselves to people with different ideas than ours? And if the track record is that when people go and listen to outsiders, they change their mind, what does it say about our basic assertions? And I love the way you put it earlier is, when the guy's up there and there's no one there to challenge or to question, the assumptions of what's being told. We just know it's a really smart guy. They're great personality, made me laugh, made me cry, great use of language, brilliant storyteller. But we need to get outside. And that's where I want to just throw this in. A big part of my world in the last 5 years has been my connection to the Center for Restorative Justice, it's put me on civil rights tour. We've gone on civil rights tours of the South. I've been exposed to the civil rights movement and the civil rights champions and what they said and what they thought. And it's only reinforced the notion that this beached white male lived in a white world for way too long, and the assumptions I had about the non-white world were way off.
Well, and I like what you're saying about getting in the mind of other people, and because I think that if you can learn the lesson of listen to whoever the person is that you're told you're not allowed to listen to, that works across all aisles. I mean, there's plenty of, in our American world right now, right and left seems to be like the biggest groups.
Yes.
But that's true on both sides. Like, don't listen to the Ukrainians. They're all evil people. Don't listen to the Russians. They're all evil people. Don't listen to the Palestinians. They're the bad guys. Don't listen to the Israelis. They're the bad guys. Don't listen to MAGA. They're not worth it. Punch a Nazi. Like, whatever it is that those people are dismissed, those are probably the stories that you most need to hear, because there's a reason we need to villainize them. Those are actual humans. They're a part of our species. Their brains work the exact same way as my brain. And if I was them, I would be them.
Think about it.
Really uncomfortable. And so if I can get in their brains, I might learn something that would change my view. And that doesn't mean that I'm going to end up being a Nazi or a pro-Israeli or a MAGA or whatever it is. But that understanding, it's going to make me a more substantial human being. And whether or not I can change that person's mind, I can use that person's mind to improve my own life. And maybe in the process, change some of their mind too. And I really appreciate that about what I see in what you're doing, offering different viewpoints and other opinions that may not agree with all of your listeners, but to give them that opportunity to hear a story that's not their own.
Well, and I've been blessed to have guys like Jamin Kohler on my podcast. In fact, I don't know if you know the name Randall Balmer, but I'm going to be interviewing him next week. And
remind me where I've heard that.
Well,
Was Randall
he's an historian. We were in seminary at the same time. He is now an Episcopalian priest, and he is highly recognized as one of the premier historians of the evangelical movement. He's just releasing a book this month, and it's called Separation of Church and State: America's Best Idea. He grew up in Iowa, in a little town up in northwest Iowa. And his dad was an evangelical free church pastor. And he was preaching a series on the book of Revelation, which came right out of the dispensational textbook. It was all about the rapture and all this. And, oh man, I'm going to have trouble coming up with the name of the movie now. But they ended up making this movie about the rapture. Do you remember seeing a movie in church about the rapture with these high school kids?
You're not talking about Thief in the Night.
That's it. That's the one.
Wait.
His dad was the preacher in Thief of the Night.
That's
teaching
why I know his
the
name.
book of Revelation. That was Randall Balmer's dad.
Yes. Okay. So I've had a short conversation with him because my dad was the preacher in Thief in the Night. Not the bad preacher. My dad was the good preacher, the one that got raptured.
Did we talk about this before?
We did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Man,
yeah.
So that's right. Oh my gosh. So they knew each other.
Yeah.
Okay, so that
they knew of each other for sure.
My gosh. Yeah. Well, there you have it. And of course, Randall's come a long way from those dispensational days as as a high school kid. But actually, I think he was in college when they made the movie. But we're also going to talk about he wrote an article about the Scopes trial, and we're going to talk about the Scopes trial as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that episode. That's like you say, it's amazing how far we haven't come in a lot of ways.
Here.
And I mean, even like it feels the same, like reading and hearing about that stuff feels the same as like knowing that there are flat earthers out there. Like, wait a second, didn't we get rid of this a long time ago?
They're out there.
How
man.
are we?
They're out there.
How are we?
In fact, we just saw a big billboard over here in Riverside, and the billboard says, "Jesus is not God." And I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. And there was a website attached to it. And we looked it up, and it turns out these guys are flat earthers.
I want to get in contact with them. I really want to have a long conversation with a flat earther.
I'll send you a link because it's I checked it out too. I thought, okay, who's out there making these kind of billboards? What's this about? And then when I did a little digging, that's what I found out. These guys are, and they're out there. It's like, okay, how do you justify that one?
Right. Yeah, I've got a long wish list of people that I want to talk to, and one of them is someone who's got their pilot's license and is also a flat earther. If that person exists, I'm dying to have a conversation with them. Well, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks so much for joining me, and let's do it again sooner than later.
Let's do it, Jamin. You have a great day.
Thank you all for joining me. Hopefully it's obvious that I spent considerable effort putting this episode together so you could have it for free. So now it's your turn. You click a couple buttons and give me something for free, and we can keep this good thing going between us. And for you wild-eyed, like-minded super fans, make sure you check out the link in the description for more free ways to show your support and keep this love train rolling. Be well, everyone. I'm rooting for you.